Before we get into today's episode, which is our buying or selling contender off seasons, just a little bit of housekeeping. Our merch design competition is currently ongoing at the Athletic Football Show Discord. We are accepting designs, ideas. We have a whole competition going about what you guys want the Athletic Football Show merch to look like. And so if you want to be involved in that, please join the Discord, throw your hat into the ring. We would love to see the creative stuff that you guys are bringing to the table. That competition is be going through early June is when it will close, and then we will start the voting on the winners. Today, me and Derek buying or selling the contenders. Let's get to it right now. Wrapping up our buying or selling off seasons series today with the contenders, the teams at the top, the teams that, let's say, have the most realistic goals and hopes of winning a Super Bowl. Before anyone complains, just putting it out there right now. This list is derived from the Super Bowl odds on one of the gambling platforms. I'm not even going to tell you which one, but it is one of the gambling platforms. It is taken straight from there. So if you have any issue with how we have bucketed the teams, including the ones that we're going to talk about today, you can take it up with the people who make the odds. I'm completely removed myself from the process.
I already saw in the Discord this morning talking about the other show where the playoff hopeful show where it was like, I can't understand X teaming over X. And it's like, we didn't do that. It's not me. It's Vegas. I'm willing to blame Vegas and gambling for a lot of problems. So
there's no clean way to do it. Absolutely no clean way. The one thing I'll say about the odds before we dig into the teams, among all of the teams on this list, being surprised by where their Super Bowl odds are relative to the others around the NFL, I think the Chargers is the most surprising. The Chargers being like firmly in this list and a pretty far cry away from the Jags, the Bears, some of these other teams that just kind of made the playoffs and then lost last year. I'm a little bit surprised that the Chargers have so much more like institutional faith behind their 2026 chances than some of these other teams.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask. Were they just 8th and that's just where we cut it off, or were they actually closer to these teams in the odds? Because that's interesting to me. And like there are flaws with teams like the Jags and the Bears and all that, but like they won 12, 13, 14 games last year.
So they have equal odds. It's kind of just where we cut it off, but the teams that we're going to start this show with, we're going to go kind of in reverse order, same way we've done with most of these shows. The Chargers have the same odds as the Chiefs, the Patriots, and the Niners. They all have the exact same Super Bowl odds based on the outlet that I'm looking at right now. And there's part of me that wants to be like, man, that seems aggressive. But there's also another part of me, two things. One, we'll talk about the Chargers and maybe why there's reasonable optimism around them. Two, after the Patriots thing last year, when I looked at their over-under win total and I was like, that doesn't seem right, and then they went to the Super Bowl, I'm just not going to talk about that stuff anymore. Like if the odds seem far removed from what my expectations are, I should recalibrate my expectations.
I should at least rethink some things a little bit. The Patriots one was funny because last year too, because I ended up in a spot where I was like, I think the defense might be good again. And I also love Drake May. And then I looked at the over under and I was like, absolutely not. No, not doing that.
And that might have been it. The fact that you were scared off by it, and if anyone in America would have been fully bought in that isn't living in the greater New England area, it would have been you. And even you had your reservations about it. And so maybe that's why I was more tepid than I should have been about the Patriots. But I was going to say I won't make the same mistake about the Chargers again. Everyone listening to this show knows that I won't make the same mistake with the Chargers.
Everyone in our job has been making this same issue with the Chargers for a decade now.
It's going to be so fun when this is the year where it's actually worth going all in. And this is the year where I'm like, I don't know, a little bit rich for me.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's dig into this. Let's start with the San Francisco 49ers, who are lumped in at the exact same level when it comes to Super Bowl odds on that list to the Los Angeles Chargers. Coaching changes, Raheem Morris in as the defensive coordinator. Veteran additions, Mike Evans, Christian Kirk. A couple of offensive line depth pieces, Brett Toth, Robert Jones. On defense, Oso Odigizua and Dre Greenlaw is back. Losses, Kendrick Bourne and Jordan Elliott out the building in free agency. In the draft, Deshaun Stribling in the second round, Romello Height and Kalen Black in the third round. Are you buying or selling the San Francisco 49ers 2026 offseason?
I'm buying as much of it as I can get. Like
Interesting. I don't
Yeah.
mind that stance, but being that enthusiastic about it, what gets you there?
So part of it is like, I think this team is just already really good and was just ravaged defensively last year. And so merely getting some of those guys back, I think, is going to get them into a good spot. And so that's not anything they did necessarily, but I really buy the way that they reloaded at wide receiver, both for tomorrow and for 3 years from now. Like tomorrow, you've got Mike Evans, who is, I think, immediately becomes an X receiver of that caliber that they haven't had in a long time. I think Kirk can still give you decent depth if he's a guy who is a little bit healthier. And then getting Stribling, who we talked a little bit around draft time, is a play for the future, but also just a play at a guy who can give you a little bit more yak. And I think especially if George Kittle is not going to be 100% early in the year, having someone who can give you a little bit of that, I think is potentially nice. And then I think on the offensive line, they have insulated themselves pretty well with all the a lot of the draft picks that they made. They also signed Robert Jones to be like guard depth for them, and so I still have concerns about like what is the ceiling of this offensive line, but I think they've at least protected themselves from like worst case scenario sort of situations. And then the defense is in a weird spot where it's sure they go get Oso Digizua. I think Romello Height can be like a decent like third down pass rusher for them and stuff. But really the additions mostly are just getting Fred Warner and Nick Bosa back. But the thing that I will say about that, in addition to again some of the other additions they made with Oso Digizua, I think the secondary is playable. It's just that last year the front was so bad you never got to see it. If the front's kind of good, I think the defense can be kind of good. And so I'm bought in on almost everything that they did.
Even some of the depth pieces they added, like Jack Jones and Nate Hobbs, if they were your starting corners on day one, you probably wouldn't feel pretty good about it. But if they're just depth guys that if they'll need to play because somebody else got hurt, I think that's something that you can live with. And I mentioned them, like Robert Jones didn't play last year, but in 2024, I thought he had some moments with Miami where it's again, if he's your swing into your offensive lineman, that's fine. And I actually thought Brett Toth played okay last year when he had to for the Eagles. And so I do think they've insulated themselves pretty well at several of these spots. And I'm with you on the secondary. I think there were two issues with the Niners secondary last year. One, the front was an absolute mess. And two, they were just extremely young. And so now you have guys that are in year two, like Malik Mustafa was hurt for a good chunk of last year before coming back. And so you had to be playing, Marquis Siegel probably earlier than you wanted to. Overall, I think they're in pretty decent shape. I'm wondering, how do you feel about the Raheem Morris part of this? Oh, and what it's potentially going to look like. Because going
Mhm.
back to Saleh, like we know that we're living in the same general family. Even, Wilkes was kind of a 4-down guy, even if he was a little bit more blitz happy. Saleh lives in that world. Raheem Morris, it's been a little bit more flexible than that. He's done a bunch of different stuff in his stops as a defensive coordinator. That part of it, I don't think it's a bad decision or the wrong way to go with who you hired to be your defensive coordinator. I'm just curious about what it ultimately looks like.
I would guess this is a situation where because Raheem Morris has been so amorphous over his period, really since he left Tampa Bay such a long time ago, that I think it will look very similar to the style of defenses they've ran previously, like the D'Amico Ryans, like the Robert Saleh. And part of that is just body types, right? Like on the edge,
Yeah,
it's a
you've
lot of
committed
guys.
to this world.
Yeah, they can't
Yeah,
really live in the Jalen Walker, James Pierce, where these guys can drop.
that's
They
probably
can
right.
be these like wide nine, like they're kind of boxed into it. And so, I think I think Raheem Morris is a fine defensive coordinator. I think they probably lose a little bit in terms of Saleh not being in the building, but if that is gained back in the talent that they're getting from Warner being back, Bosa being back, trading for Oso Digizua, I don't think this is going to be an elite defense by any means, but if they can be in the top third-ish of the league in a pretty good outcome, and then the offense is what it is every single year, this is again a team that can win the NFC West.
Put in on it. I'm worried about the fragility of it, but what can you really do about that? Like
Yeah.
with all of these teams, and I do think that they're more susceptible to this than an X team, right? The idea of like, well, if they get hurt, they're not going to be as good as they want to be. Obviously, you can say that about every team, but with the Niners specifically, Mike Evans is deep into his 30s, has dealt with injuries. Trent Williams getting older, started to get banged up. We know with Ricky Pearsall, George Kittle was somebody that's consistently been banged up. When is he going to be back? And so I do think the offense overall is pretty fragile. But when you're in the spot the Niners are in, where it's like, we're just trying to win the Super Bowl with this build, I think swinging for the fences and being willing to live with the potential downside is a totally fine mindset to take into the offseason. So I'm into this. Like I do think that when you think about where they were on January 1st and where they are now, I think they have positioned themselves well.
Right. And again, part of this too is just like they were a really good football team last year that just got like a little bit unlucky. And so I'm pretty bought in on where this team's going.
Yeah, Nick Bosa and Fred Warner being your two best offseason additions, I think, is a fine place to be. That's exactly where they are. Let's get to the Kansas City Chiefs. Eric Bieniemy back as the offensive coordinator after whatever you want to call that situation with Matt Nagy. Additions on the veteran market: Kenneth Walker in free agency, Kyrus Tonga, Alohi Gilman, Kader Kohu on a very small deal. I assume just a fight for that nickel position. Losses in the veteran world: traded Trent McDuffie, Brian Cook, and Leo Chanel leave in free agency. In the draft, Mansour Delane and Peter Woods in the first round, R. Mason Thomas in the second round. Are you buying or selling the Kansas City Chiefs offseason?
I think I am tepidly buying it. And I think part of how I had to get there was you kind of have to reframe that this probably is a soft reset year for them. Like they are actually accepting that it's a little bit of a soft reset with, I think when Dallas made the Micah Parsons trade, right, it was a lot of like, we're giving up a player so that we can rebuild the entire defense in a different image. The Chiefs kind of did that with the Trent McDuffie trade, where they get multiple picks back, obviously get a first-round pick, and it allows them to draft Peter Woods at 28, 29, or whatever that was going to be, in addition to the Tonga signing, which we've talked a little bit about, those two kind of being you can maybe start to play a little bit more odd fronts. You have a lot more juice up front than you had previously. Obviously, they also drafted R. Mason Thomas. The secondary is also completely retooled. I have some issues with how they handled the offseason on offense. Like, I would have liked to have done something else at wide receiver. Like, I think not doing anything there until you had a 5th-round pick, I think was a little bit questionable. But I think overall, I don't even quibble with the Kenneth Walker signing, because I think if you're not going to have Mahomes and you didn't have explosive players anywhere else, getting a running back who can give those to you, I do think is a fine signing. So I'm on like tepid buy for what the Chiefs did.
When it comes to available resources, like money to throw around this offseason specifically, I don't think there's any more effective and efficient way to use your dollars to find explosiveness than signing Kenneth Walker in free agency. Mm-hmm. Like, what $14 million a year receiver is going to give you the explosiveness that Kenneth Walker is? Nobody.
Probably nobody. And even some of the receivers that you would have paid a little bit more than that are not necessarily explosive guys. Like Romeo Doubs was not really going to give that to you if you were paying a little bit more for that. Like, I guess Wan'Dale Robinson, but like, do they need another 5'9" player? I don't think so. Like, I
think that the Kenneth Walker, I completely understand the mindset behind it. And again, we talked about this a lot on multiple different shows this spring, but when you look at, and I know Kenneth Walker isn't Jahmyr Gibbs, but when you look at what Jahmyr Gibbs is paid, or some of these other really explosive backs that are giving you, let's call even Derrick Henry, right? Like even Derrick Henry is in this conversation, where if you have a back that's going to give you, let's call it 15 to 20-yard plays over the course of the season, and you're paying him $14 million a year, that's really good bang for your buck when it comes to paying for explosiveness. And for this team specifically, it's exactly the type of skill set that they needed. That I'm in. Like, I don't have no qualms, no quibbles with that whatsoever. I'm with you on the receiver thing. I just am frustrated on, even if you're a little bit more explosive, what is it going to look like when it's 3rd and 7 and teams are playing man coverage against you and you need somebody to get open? Is that player on the roster? And not even just somebody to get open, but even if the guy's not open, somebody that you can pin the ball on 3rd and 7 on the outside. Like, do you have that player? And they still don't have that guy. And combining not seeking out that skill set with my concern that by bringing Eric Bieniemy back, are we just going to have an offensive staff that's rubber stamping everything we've seen over the last few years? It's hard to eject that stuff out of my mind. All of that being said, the defensive remake and the thought process and how they've gone about this, overall, I still think I'm buying it, even if I have a lot of reservations about, not a lot, even if I still have some lingering reservations about what the plan on offense has looked like.
And I'll say, too, my offensive issues extend a little bit to, like, tight end. The fact that they didn't invest at all in tight end when Travis Kelce's a year-to-year thing at this point, and even the guys they have behind them are kind of just role players, and so I was shocked that they did nothing there. Like,
every team in the league drafted a tight end in the second round.
Right, and they couldn't find a way. Like, it's crazy. And so I probably would have tried to have thrown at least one more of their other premium resources on the offense, but It is a little bit hard to say that, like, at the same time, where I think a lot of the stuff they did on defense was interesting. Like, I talked about the retooled secondary. You probably put in Mansour Delane for what you were getting out of Trent McDuffie. Not necessarily the same quality, but that's where you're going to play him. Alohi Gilman is coming in for Brian Cook. And then signing Kadar Kohu and getting Shamari Connor out of the nickel, I think is a nice thing for them.
I
Because
agree.
part of my complaint with McDuffie being out of the nickel wasn't just that McDuffie I thought was like an S tier nickel instead of like a B plus level outside corner. It was that the drop off from him at nickel to what you were getting out of Shamari Connor, where he's more comfortable at safety, was just massive. And so I think being able to shuffle that around and just get more bodies where they ought to be playing, I think is a really nice thing for them. So again, I think the front is going to look different. It's a really retooled secondary. You don't know how it's going to play out, but I think I trust Steve Spagnuolo enough to get a lot out of a unit. And I think there is an element of last year, obviously the defense was not super talented, but I think you also saw a lot of Spagnuolo's stuff start to fall flat in a way that it had not. And so I actually think injecting like demanded creativity and forcing new ideas because the personnel is going to be so different, I'm excited to see what that looks like for them.
Like just trying to cut these problems off at the pass and like get straight to the point rather than like, we'll kind of play around in the margins here and see if we can get there. That's what the Mansour Delane thing is to me. And it was surprising based on some of the pre-draft conversations, just because so many people went back to this idea, and I don't blame them, saying, well, the Chiefs just don't really do that at corner. The Chiefs have gotten by with these third, fourth round picks, and they've turned them into really good players. And that's totally fair. But when you think about what the Chiefs defense was at its best over the last few years, it was when they had the type of cornerback play where they could just walk into a game against a team like the 2023 49ers and be like, hey, you.
Yep.
And not messing around to get back to that place. I completely understand that thought process. And so I'm excited about it. Like the things they did on defense, I look at it and I'm like, I get the vision here. I do think that this could be very cool by the time we get to the end of it. And on offense, even if there's still some of the stuff that's kind of hanging over it, there's part of me that's like, if the quarterback's healthy and the pass catchers are healthy and the offensive line's good and they're a little bit more explosive in the backfield, they'll probably be fine. They'll be frustrating in the same ways maybe, but they'll probably be fine.
They'll probably be fine. They might be slow until week 7, 8 or whatever. It takes Mahomes a few games or whatever. But like, even if last year's offense was just average in terms of like running back explosive, the offense would have looked so different. And
I thought you were saying that.
I
thought you were saying that it was. I was
oh
like,
God, no,
they were. What are you talking about?
They were like worst or second worst in terms of running back explosive. That's what I'm saying. If they're just paying to be average there, it changes the entire math for the offense.
Yeah, I'm into the Kenneth Walker part of this, even if I have some questions about the rest of it. But I do think that with that skill set, even with some of the other limitations, they'll probably end up in a decent spot. Chargers offseason. Mike McDaniel in as the offensive coordinator. Chris O'Leary in as the defensive coordinator. I kind of feel bad for Chris O'Leary. Like, no one has talked about him the entire offseason because every single bit of oxygen about the Chargers coaching staff changes are solely about Mike McDaniel, which I think is fair. We'll talk about why, but that seems to be the place we've reached with this team. Additions, Cole Strange and Tyler Biadasz on the offensive line. Charlie Kohler, Keaton Mitchell, Alec Ingold all coming over. Dalvin Tomlinson for about $6 million on the interior of the defensive line. Losses on the veteran market: Odafe Owe, Zion Johnson, Benjamin St. Juste, Deshaun Hand. In the draft, Keem Mesidor in the first round, Jake Slaughter in the second round, Travis Burke as tackle depth, and then Genesis Smith throwing another body at safety, which we thought they might do even a little bit earlier in the draft. Are you buying or selling the 2026 Los Angeles Chargers offseason?
This is a team that I consistently complain about not making enough swings, and I still feel that way. I still feel like they did not go out and make like a superstar swing, really hardly in any way. But when you hire a guy like Mike McDaniel and do start to build the offense in his image, like you bring in Alec Ingold, you completely retool the offensive line, I think in a way that is interesting. You bring in Keaton Mitchell, like I think the offense can finally be what it is meant to be for a long time. And so I think they did end up setting themselves up to get onto this path where you can hire a guy like McDaniel and it's going to be pretty good. And I think I'm excited about it, obviously for Justin Herbert reasons, right? Like seeing a guy like Justin Herbert in a Mike McDaniel offense, I think is going to be fun. I think seeing O'Marion Hampton in an offense like this is fun. Like, he was the guy where him and Genty last year just getting bludgeoned behind horrible offensive lines. But in
Awful.
those, it's terrible. But in those like 2 or 3 instances in a game where they got a shot, you were like, oh shit, that guy is like really, really talented. And so being able to see as much talent as they have at quarterback and running back with hopefully a better offensive line, hopefully healthier, and just a better scheme to help those guys, I'm super bought in there. Obviously, losing Minter on defense sucks, but I think they've made a lot of the right moves on defense to try to kind of hang around in the same general area if they can.
What makes you say that?
I mean, I didn't love Akeem Mesidor, but I understand the idea of trying to get a guy who can immediately give them like solid edge 3 play right away. I think drafting Genesis Smith in the 4th round, where I will say if there's anything that concerns me about this team is that I don't love the safeties. The safeties scare me a little bit. Like, the Tony Jefferson story is cool. That just feels like that's something that you should not be betting on week 1 going into any season. And then Elijah Molden is fine, but I don't think like a super difference maker. And then we saw last year when they had to dip into their safety depth, it was a huge issue for them. Like when RJ Mickens was on the field, like taking a lot of bad angles, missing tackles. And so for a defense that, you know, I don't know exactly what Chris O'Leary is going to do in terms of, is it going to look just like Jesse Minter? I assume it wants to be in a similar-ish build. And so if your last line of defense in a defense like that is going to be a little bit of a problem, I am mildly worried about how that's going to go.
Buying it mostly because of the McDaniel thing. Like, I buy into that being, if you, okay, we've done this with every team. Why are you going to be different? You tell me why. Is that a satisfactory?
It's easy to see on offense, yeah.
Is that a satisfactory answer? This is a satisfactory answer as to why the things that torpedoed your season at the end of the year might not happen again. I'm in. The offensive line is definitely still a theory in terms of what the interior is going to look like. I feel like we're in a place schematically that mitigates offensive line play. They can get by with a little bit less. I would not be surprised at all if the combination of the tackles getting healthy and the 3 moves that they've made on the interior is enough to not only survive, but be in a really good place in a Mike McDaniel-led offense. Even if for a lot of other teams and a lot of other situations, I maybe have some more questions. I think they've done enough there. I'm wondering, the boost that you're going to get on offense with the new play caller and with some of the new talent, how much of that do you need to offset what is likely going to be at least a small step back on defense, considering you're swapping out one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL for an unknown, even if you're excited about him, and you didn't do anything. It's the same collection of players. And so if one's getting yanked one way and one's getting yanked the other way, where do we settle? And is the offense improvement enough to offset whatever a small step back on defense might look like? I'm open to the idea that it is. Like, I absolutely think that when it's all said and done, you're in a place where you feel very good about this team's ability to compete. I just wonder where those two endpoints eventually end up.
I think the reason I'm at least willing to buy it is that we've seen the last 2 seasons, and I know the defense has been good over those last 2 seasons, but we've seen their season completely come to an end because the offense exploded, like entirely, like could not be on the field with other good NFL teams. And I think them pretty clearly like moving themselves off of that path. If you at least give yourself a chance every week with a functional defense and a quarterback like Justin Herbert and a couple of playmakers like Ladd McConkey and O'Marion Hampton, you have a chance every single week until you get like deep into the playoffs. And so I think for that reason, I am bought in on it. And obviously losing Minter is going to suck. I think if it was losing Minter and on offense, we're going for a play caller that we're excited about, but don't necessarily know a whole lot, and maybe they've only done it for a year, yada, 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 I would feel a little bit differently. I am very confident Mike McDaniel is extremely good at the job and will get a lot out of the team that he has with him.
I'm 100% in agreement. And with the Chris O'Leary, Jesse Minter thing, it's not a criticism. Like, you lost a really good defensive coordinator who's now a head coach. Like, just because the next guy is an unknown, that's not meant as a criticism. I think that's just what you're working through and kind of what you have to be thinking about when it comes to the expectations for this season. But overall, I'm in. I think the McDaniel thing, plus it's not just the McDaniel thing, like the ways that they've remade the offense and like the whole like the Charlie Cole, Keaton Mitchell of it all. Like I'm bought in on like what the vision of it is and what it is supposed to look like, and I'm very excited to watch it. Let's get to our next one here. The New England Patriots. Zach Kerr, now the full-time defensive coordinator after obviously dealing with the situation they dealt with last year. Additions on the veteran market. Romeo Doubs, Elijah Vera Tucker. I forgot about that one. That's the biggest move I forgot about until I like went and was going through all the depth charts. I was like, oh yeah, that one should help. Julian Hill, Reggie Gilliam, Kevin Byard, and Draymond Jones on defense. I guess we can include AJ Brown here. Did you? I kind of did.
No, but we should, right? Like we should, like it's probably going to happen. So I actually hadn't yet, and so we definitely should though. It's gonna if we're doing that on the opposite end for the Eagles, right? Like we
probably should
just gone, then we should do it.
Let's
on the
just
other
have
end
this discussion as though AJ Brown is on the Patriots, and then if we have to amend it later, we can. Losses: Clavin Chasen, Kyrus Tonga, and Jalen Hawkins gone in free agency. In the draft, Caleb Lomu, offensive tackle in the first round, Gabe Akis, edge rusher in the second round, Eli Raridon, the tight end in the third round. Are you buying or selling the 2026 New England Patriots offseason?
I think I can buy it. Yeah, obviously the offensive line, I just mostly don't know what to do with, but they obviously have enough bodies to solve the problem. Like, I just don't know where Caleb Lomu is going to play, what they want to do with Will Campbell. Is Caleb Lomu going to play? Like, I think they have a lot of questions to sort out there, but I think if you have Romeo Doubs being your, kind of third down chain mover, can just be a consistent guy. You have AJ Brown, hopefully being AJ Brown, and then Kayshon Boutte kind of being like this flex third explosive guy. I think the offensive skill player positions are like just way, way fuller than they were last year, because the offense was good last year, but that was mostly a product of having like talented running backs. Stephon Diggs was fine, and then you just had a superstar quarterback. But they were getting away with that against worse defenses. I think now that they're going to have a different schedule, they're going to need to have some of these guys that they've brought in. The defense, I'm not sure what to do with, because there is part of me that says, okay, Draymond Jones, Gabe Akis, you're clearly leaning into something here, and I like that. The Kevin Byard move, I don't know, but I at least, like over Jalen Hawkins, I don't know if I would have done that, but I at least understand what they're trying to do. And I also like year two of Kerr. He was a guy who, again, was not necessarily supposed to be their play caller last year. Really turned up the heat over the last like 8 or so weeks of the season in an interesting way. And so maybe giving him another full season gives you something. The defensive tackle depth freaks me out a little bit. And I do wonder a little bit about their corner depth. Like, it just feels like if a couple of things go wrong for this team, the defense could start to fall apart.
Interesting. So they drafted Josh Farmer in the 4th round last year as an interior defensive lineman. Corey Durden gave them some like decent snaps last year. He was a street free agent. And then they're actually, it feels like, going to be leaning on 2 of those guys. Like, if you look at the moves that they made, going to get Akis while having Draymond Jones, like you said, stylistically, you're leaning into like bigger power players. Elijah Ponder was a street free agent for them last year that played a couple hundred snaps. He is that like 245-pound body type. It seems like he's going to get a decent amount of run based on how this room is built. And the same goes for Corey Durden. So they're really going to be leaning on a lot of guys that were day 3 and beyond acquisitions for them in last year's draft, which I get it. Like they played last year. They probably flashed enough for you to feel good about what they can do in bigger roles, but it's just an interesting set of bets for a team that was in the Super Bowl last year.
Exactly. And so it might be fine. Again, some of those guys like Durden, and I think Elijah Ponder especially actually played pretty well as a role player. But Durden is one of those guys that, like, I'm just not sure doubling his snap count because Tonga is going to be gone. Like, that scares me a little bit, especially with how well Tonga played in the middle of that defense for them.
The idea of our best pass rushers are going to be our interior players, and then we're just going to have a lot of pocket crushers outside of that. I understand that. Like, totally. I understand that as like an overall model, and it seems to be that's where they've gone with it. We talked about this a little bit with Hawkins. This is a team that played a decent amount of single high when you consider the league-wide trends. And so if you're going to be a team that's playing with a single post safety a lot, having Kevin Byard be that guy where he doesn't have to come down and make plays against the run that often, and you kind of have more defined roles between those two safeties with him and Woodson. I like Kevin Byard here in a way that I might not for a team that needs more interchangeable safeties in a split safety world. So I get some of your reservations, but I think that this could wind up in a decent spot. I believe in the offensive moves enough where overall I think I'm bought in on this. Like, obviously trading a 2027 first round pick for AJ Brown is an aggressive move, but you're in a spot where it might be worth being aggressive. You think about like premium positions, they probably do need one more pass rusher. Like if as I move forward to like the 2027 draft, what is the spot where when that pick doesn't happen, we're going to be sitting there being like, man, it would have been nice to be able to use this on X. Pass rusher is still probably the answer, but they've got 2 tackles, they've got receivers now, they've got corners. And so edge rusher is really, as we're projecting into the future, maybe the one premium position you're not going to have access to. But I actually kind of like this. It reminds me a little bit of the way we talked about Washington last year. And I know that didn't age very well, but I don't think Washington's mindset about improving the offensive line in the way that they did as a way to kind of offset some regression was a bad thought process. I actually like that, where it's like, we're going to get better here, and we're not just going to believe that if we stay the course, we'll get incrementally better in the ways that we need to. The way the Patriots have handled their pass catching spots kind of reminds me of that.
Well, and that's the thing with Washington is that Washington did all that with the offensive line, and obviously Jaden Daniels gets hurt, and that has some amount to do with this. But like the Washington skill core just wasn't very good in a way that
that wasn't the problem. Over-indexing on offensive line additions is not that wasn't the mistake that Washington made last offseason.
Right. The offensive line was totally fine. And so looking at an offense now that I think New England's offensive line should be better with some of the additions they made, including Jared Wilson moving to his more natural position at center. I think that should be pretty good for them. And so
you're just so much bigger now. Like if you just look at the bodies across the board, you're just so much bigger now. And I do think that matters.
And even with their 6th round pick that they made, Demetrius Crownover, 6'7", 320. That's again, he's probably not. You probably don't need him to play this year or want him to play, but they clearly have on both sides of the ball. They wanted to get bigger, and so I like where they're headed with that.
I mean, obviously, Jared Wilson isn't like a massive hulking center, but he's a big enough center to have played guard last year. And then AVT is not a small guy. Mike Onwenu is one of the biggest guards in the league, and so the fact that they have these like bigger body types on the interior compared to the league average, and then their tackles are, if like I'm talking more about Campbell and Lomu, like being like the tackles of the future. It's just a very strange collection of like offensive line skill sets and body types and strengths and weaknesses. I can't remember anything like it.
Well, but it's like their defensive line too, where it's like inverted, where a lot of teams like they have like where you got most teams want like your freaks on the edges and on the bookends, and they've kind of built it the opposite, where it's like, nope, spot as close to the football as we can get. That's where our stars and our big guys are. We'll figure it out on the other spots.
Is the uncertainty about what Caleb Lomu is supposed to be, is that coloring your opinion here at all? Like I don't want to do this where when I don't like a player in the pre-draft process, when a team drafts him, I'm like, oh, I don't like that. Like there's a very good chance I'm wrong about that player. And I think it should be more about the process of how a team sees him and how they're going to incorporate him as I judge whether it was a good or bad draft pick. But with this one specifically, it's coming from 2 different directions, where I didn't really like Caleb Lomu, and also he was a left tackle only in college, and you just drafted a left tackle from last year. So how ultimately, even on a multi-year level, is this supposed to come together? Like if you want to redshirt Caleb Lomu for a year, that's fine. Like I think that's a reasonable thing to do with an offensive tackle, but what are you going to do next year? Is he the right tackle? Is Campbell the right tackle? Like, am I thinking too much about this? Like that's my only kind of lingering thing with that move overall and how it plays into the larger picture.
I think I'm on both sides of it, where I think with Lomu specifically, it does freak me out a little bit that I have no idea what to do with it. Like you can't really find a spot for him this year unless they end up saying they want to move Will Campbell to right tackle, or like Vera Tucker was a tackle coming into the league, and so maybe he moves out to right and Campbell slips into guard, Lomu plays left tackle. I don't know. The uncertainty freaks me out a little bit, but I will say I think the reason even if I didn't love the pick, even if I don't love the move, or at least I have questions with it, the other parts of their offseason, specifically on offense, I buy so much that I'm like, this is okay. The fact that the biggest question I have on offense is where's your first round pick at the offensive line going to play? Having that kind of depth, I'm like, it'll be okay.
Yeah, it usually is. It's a good place to have contingency plans. Sticking the AFC East here, the Buffalo Bills. First thing I want to talk about with the Bills. You know the Bills are 10-1 to win the Super Bowl in some places?
10-1.
With a new head coach.
That's kind of crazy. Even though like technically he's been in the building, that still feels like a lot for any team that is moving to a new head coach.
The Ravens are too. The Ravens and the Bills are
this
10
is
to
just
1.
the power. This is what we've talked about. It's the power of having one of those quarterbacks. Like you
I
could
went back.
almost.
I was so curious about this, and I was like, when has this happened recently? Like, has there been any other head coach change where a team is like 10 to 1 or better that's in like the top 3 or 4 in Super Bowl odds? The only two that I've like were kind of close. When Mike McCarthy got hired by the Cowboys in 2020, they were 12 to 1 that year to win the Super Bowl. And then I was curious, the Colts year 1 of Jim Caldwell, like that was the only kind of similar situation I could think of. They were 14 to 1 in year 1 of Jim Caldwell when Peyton Manning was in Indianapolis. And a lot of these other quarterbacks that are at this level, their coaches never changed, right? Year 1 of LaFleur, we didn't know what the Packers were going to be. There weren't any expectations over that with Rodgers. Peyton and Breeze were there the whole time in New Orleans. And so we just haven't had this. And then Brady obviously had Belichick forever. So we don't really have coaching changes mid-career in the last like 20 years for quarterbacks of this ilk. And so it maybe shouldn't be surprising that the chart, like both the Bills and the Ravens are in this weird spot where they have these incredible expectations, not only for first-year head coaches, but coaches who were fired. Like, it's just a weird situation.
Yeah, I don't know if I can remember it, like maybe when the Steelers like changed head coaches like 20 something years ago, but even that doesn't really feel like that. And I don't know. Like I don't
obviously
know
they
what
were
other
very
situation.
good that year, right? I mean, like
right.
they were very good very quickly. That's probably the best.
That's probably analogous
example.
Specifically because like it is like a in-house thing, right?
Yeah, and that's another one of those things where the coach just moved on from a really good team. And so I think that makes it a lot more reasonable that a team would have like sky high expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So the Steelers were 25 to 1 in 2007.
Okay. Really?
Yeah.
Were they that bad in 06?
25
or was it just
to 1
the uncertainty of Was it just the uncertainty of bringing
They were
over
8-8 in 2006 in the last year under Cowher. 8-8.
Okay. Then I don't know. I
this
can't
is
think
a
of
weird
another
situation with both the Bills and the Ravens. Coaching changes, speaking of, for the Bills. Joe Brady in as the head coach, Jim Leonard in as the defensive coordinator. Added DJ Moore, Bradley Chubb, CJ Gardner-Johnson, D. Alford, Mike Dana on defense. Lost David Edwards in free agency. In the draft, TJ Parker and Davison Bonison in the second round. Are you buying or selling the 2026 offseason for the Bills?
I don't know.
This is a tough one.
They're the one that I want to talk through the most, I think, because I think on offense, let's remove whatever we want to say about the offensive coordinator moving to head coach, all that stuff. We can talk about that separately in a second. I think the moves they made on offense are fine. Like not paying Edwards like what they were going to pay him for this point in his career with what they had available. I kind of get it. And they insulated themselves. Okay, like Alec Anderson is already a guy who has played a decent amount of snaps for them. They sign Austin Corbett. They throw a bunch of draft picks at it. I get what they were doing there. Bring in DJ Moore. I think that maybe a little bit expensive with what they paid for him, but like getting a guy who they can actually rely on to be the number one for Josh Allen. We've seen what that can do for their offense. And so I get that. So I like a lot of the moves that they made there. And then defensively, I do think I like the way that they retooled the edge room. I think that the secondary could be interesting. Obviously, bring in Jim Leonard, I'm pretty excited about. I just don't know how I feel about Joe Brady going from offensive coordinator to head coach and what that does for the overall everything. Like that's the part of it I have a hard time getting a handle on.
There's always going to be unknowns with that. Like just always. Landing on Joe Brady at the end of that process, I can understand being like, man, we're gonna fire Sean McDermott just to like land with the guy who was already in the building. But at the same time, I do think that the opportunity to bring in somebody like Jim Leonard and transform your mindset, approach, scheme on defense, that is a significant change. And like I assume that the offense is going to have a lot of the same DNA that it did when Joe Brady was the offensive coordinator, but I don't think it's going to be entirely the same. I mean, you did change over like a huge chunk of your offensive staff. You have a new offensive line coach now, which I don't think is a good thing after Aaron Kromer left, but you got guys that come from a different background. Like Pete Carmichael was the offensive coordinator for this team. And so now you're leaning even more into the Saints Sean Payton world than you might have leaned into previously. And so even if it's the same play caller, I do think that it could look and feel a little bit different. And there's a chance that his influence as the head coach makes things look and feel a little bit different. Like, I do think Sean McDermott did a very good job for a very long time, and that upgrading from a coach like Sean McDermott is not easy. But I'm open to the idea that the Bills might be in a better place because Joe Brady is the head coach. And so even accounting for that and the offense, I still think the Jim Leonhard part of this and just seeking out new ideas on defense is enough for me overall to get excited about the holistic impact the coaching staff and coaching change might have.
I'm definitely willing to think that it's going to be good, especially because, like, again, I don't think the offense is going to be worse. I just wonder, like, what does Joe Brady look like running the entire operation? But I'll say this. I feel like we both had a lot of these reservations, or at least questions, about what Dallas was going to be doing when they were promoting Brian Schottenheimer from offensive coach and offensive assistant into being into that head coaching role. And, like, how is he going to handle all that stuff? Obviously, he's a little bit older than Joe Brady, I think, but there's a decent chance that he handles.
He's a lot older than Joe Brady.
Yeah. But there's a decent chance that, like, Brady can handle that stuff, right? Like, he's been in the NFL for a decent amount of time now at a handful of different stops. And so I'm at least open to the idea that he can handle all that stuff and, like, again, I think part of what's complicated with it too is it always felt like the Sean McDermott teams were so buttoned up. And so getting to that level immediately as a first-year head coach is going to be hard. But I do think that the roster is talented enough. They made a lot of the right moves. And again, I like what they did with Jim Leonhard, like bringing him in and then just throwing a ton of picks, or at least a couple picks and a bunch of signings at the secondary to prevent themselves from the disaster situation they ended up in last year. I do like the approach that they made there.
What do you think about CJ Gardner-Johnson? I think that people that are looking at that signing are thinking of CJ Gardner-Johnson like a few years ago when he was a member of like Super Bowl teams and not a guy who was available halfway through last season for free. I just think it's important to like reset what you think of him as a player and like where he is in his career. He was on the street last year, halfway through the year, and the Bears signed him to be like their emergency nickel when Kyler Gordon got hurt.
I think what they did at safety this offseason was just they did not want to go into, again, another season where DeMar Hamlin is supposed to be the week one starter. And so just throwing bodies of CJ Gardner-Johnson. They also signed Geno Stone, who obviously didn't play well in Cincinnati. But you could convince me that with new and better coaching with a guy like Jim Leonhard, he could at least be serviceable. And then you also draft Jalen Kilgore. Like just throwing enough bodies at the problem that like we're going to have somebody who is a little bit better for us. I can at least get there with that part of it.
And also, I think just the physicality you're hopefully bringing to that group with like Gardner-Johnson, Kilgore, like the combination of those guys, I absolutely think it can be an upgrade. I also just think that people have talked about him and like, man, this is a big offseason addition. It's like, I don't know, guys. Like, I wouldn't be treating it that way based on where he is in his career. But overall, the plan back there, I'm with you. I can completely get behind. The only other thing with the defense is just that I look at what they did up front and the combination of Bradley Chubb and TJ Parker, my question about this, and I'm open to the answer being very, how much different does the pass rush feel in big time moments for the Bills this year compared to what it's felt like over the last few years? Like are Bradley Chubb and TJ Parker enough to give this group a different feel in high leverage moments deep into the season?
I don't know that this solves the issue of them not having we know that we can have two guys straight off the edge with obviously one of those guys and potentially Greg Rousseau. I do think, though, that this rotation of Bradley Chubb, TJ Parker, and even Mike Dana, one, I think they can at least crush the pocket a little bit more consistently. But then also, I think they help the run defense in a way that like will just allow them to get into some of the more favorable third downs. And so I think the additions there on top of, even if the tackling at safety is 15% better and you just stop some of these explosives that they gave up last year, that combination goes a long way, I think, for a defense like this. And so even if I think we want to see what this team looks like with an ace pass rusher, and they've been obviously looking for it for a while, even if these are just B-level additions in terms of pure pass rush, I do think the holistic addition that you get from these guys is going to be a pretty good boost for them.
I think, and last point I'll make about this, when I watching Denver over the last few years, and you don't necessarily want to do this where it's like, well, it's just going to be what the Broncos were. Like, I have no idea. Like, Jim Leonard has a very specific role in what that ended up looking like, but you still kind of get designs on what it can be based on what a guy's previous stop looked like. And in Denver, it's like, you think about those guys coming off the edge and it's just gasoline. And so them not really doing
they're all 240 pounds.
And them not doing that and going for like a bigger body player in TJ Parker. Again, I don't even necessarily know if it's wrong. It's just one of those where it's like, all right. Just going back for these more like 265-pound guys who can do a little bit of everything. And maybe that's just the organizational thought process and mandate, and that's what they're going to do. But it's just, I didn't know if we were going to end up in that spot again, and that's where we ended up.
That is interesting because it did seem like coming out of the Sean McDermott era, it was like, oh, they do have an opportunity to be a little bit different and
exactly
hunt some different body types. And it's like, nope, 265 pounds. That's the limit to ride in Buffalo.
And again, I don't know if that's necessarily wrong. I just wasn't sure if it was going to happen. And sometimes it's fun to like chase shiny new things and have things feel a little bit different. And that's just not where we ended up with the Bills. Let's get to the next one here. The Baltimore Ravens. Jesse Minter in as the head coach. Declan Doyle in as the offensive coordinator from Chicago. Veteran additions: John Simpson, Trey Hendrickson, Calais Campbell, Jalen Hawkins. Lost Tyler Linderbaum, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler, Patrick Ricard, Alohi Gilman, a bunch of like Ardarius Washington, a lot of like smaller role players that we've talked a lot about. In the draft, Van Gaione in the first round, Zion Young in the second round, Jacoby Lane in the third round, Elijah Surratt in the fourth round. Are you buying or selling the 2026 Baltimore Ravens offseason?
Man, this is another one that I don't know. I will say this. Defensively, I think it's very easy to buy. Like Jesse Minter, I think is fantastic, and not even just Minter. The fact that his right-hand man for this is going to be Anthony Weaver, another guy who has been in the building before and is familiar with some of these players, but also I think just is a good defensive mind by himself. I think having those two guys run the defense, where I think over the last couple of years with the Ravens, it's not that they don't have talent, and they're an imperfect unit in terms of how it's built, but it just never quite felt like they were getting everything out of that unit the way that McDonald had previously. And so
it was less than the sum of the parts, where previously it had been more than the sum of the parts. And you really felt the gap between those two things.
100%. And so if they can get back to something that is closer to feeling like they are really maximizing everybody and everybody's playing the right role and stuff like that, and maybe Minter and Weaver get a little bit more out of whoever linebacker 2 is going to be, whether that's Buchanan or Simpson. And maybe the defensive line depth feels a little bit better now that Matabike is going to be back and Calais Campbell's in the building. And you have Zion Young hopefully giving you a little bit more off the edge at least in terms of run defense. So I can really buy it defensively, that if things go right for them, they have enough depth that they can be a top 8 sort of defense again, because I really do trust this defensive brain trust. The offense, it's not that I don't buy it. It's that I genuinely have a hard time trying to wrap my head around what this is going to look like, because from the first element of it, I think when you look at the interior, it's like on a pure football level, you can kind of like, okay, losing Tyler Linderbaum sucks, but you draft a first-round guard and Simpson's is a pretty good guard himself. So does that come out in the wash somewhere? Like, probably. But I don't know what the offense is going to look like. Like, I know what Declan Doyle is coming from, but I just don't know how that pastes on to what Lamar Jackson has been to this point in his career. Like, I'm genuinely
Where
curious.
do you think the disconnects are? Like, what are the points that you think there's a little bit of a gap that you want to see cleared?
I mean, just my assumption is that Declan Doyle wants to be probably more of an under-center operation, and that's generally how, a lot of the offenses that he's come from has operated, and Lamar Jackson just hasn't done a lot of that. He can do it, and like they did some of that with Monken, even with Greg Roman, they did it a little bit, but he has generally been more of like, when they want to get the running back in the dot, they're a pistol team, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, I think that is going to be there's going to have to be some sort of push and pull where either Lamar Jackson is willing to be a little bit more under center and they become that style of offense, or Declan Doyle is going to have to kind of retrofit some of what he does to fit some of the pistol timing and some of the spacing and stuff like that.
Do you think we're at a place in Lamar's career where it would behoove both him and the Ravens for him to be closer to, I was going to say Jared Goff, for him to be closer to what that Bears asked from Caleb Williams last year? Do you think ultimately that is in the best interest of both the player and the offense?
I think probably. Like, I
I
think
think
we
so
are at a
too.
point, and I think for a couple of reasons. I don't think it's just Lamar. I think it's also the fact that, like, this is just not a pass catching group that I want to be like, where we're spread out and we're asking the quarterback to just be in gun and see it and do all these stuff. Like, that's just not how this group is built. And I think Lamar can do some of that stuff. I just don't know if we're at a point where I feel like the pass catching group is any better. Maybe one of these rookies hits and that's different. But even the rookies they drafted are for this new style of offense, right? Like, they are bigger bodies, guys that can be in line a little bit and they can block. And so I really do think it probably behooves them to be a little bit more of a run centric, under center type of offense. And obviously I think that can be good for a lot of reasons. One of it too is just like, Derrick Henry is probably the running back in the NFL that you get the most value of that from, where you are just bludgeoning people and then letting him be like truly just end games in the fourth quarter. And so I can totally buy what this offense might look like. I'm just genuinely curious about what the push and pull is supposed to be.
I do think we might see like him under center much more than we've ever seen him in the past. I'm excited about it.
Hmm.
Like I just think that I think it's a lot of different things. I think some of it is I'm curious what the Ben Johnson influence looks like as we have these assistants in that tree now and the success that he's had, like if that starts to kind of drift around the league, what ultimately is the impact of that? I I think I'm really interested in what Declan Doyle does with the job. Like the it's interesting. Like you think about what these trees look like and what they feel like and sort of the shared DNA with the coaches among them. And if I had to put a pin on like what the Shanahan McVay one is, I don't know where I'd land, like the through line between all the guys in that group. But I think the thing that Ben Johnson and Declan Doyle share the most is that they're kind of maniacal. Like these are people who are just like obsessed with trying to come up with the coolest shit possible and be the best offense that they can be. And like in the way that like really comes through personality wise. And so I'm just curious like what that version of Wunderkind offensive coordinator looks like as it drifts around the league. Like I'm just excited about what Declan Doyle could do with this opportunity. That's on like a personality, like just bigger picture trend type level. The actual mechanics of it, play in and play out, I'm excited about watching Lamar like rip the shit out of some digs off play action. Like I do think it actually does fall in line with some of the things that he does best. I don't think it's misaligned, even if we're maybe going to see a different version of him than we've seen previously, if that makes sense.
It does. He's an excellent middle of the field thrower. Like, it was
Yes.
the thing for him coming out of college, and he's always been really good at it. I would say, to really quickly hit on like the play calling difference, the McVay Shanahan guys always just feel very meticulous and just like, what is the most efficient way that we can consistently run this? Whereas like Ben Johnson has always felt like he's just trying to drive the knife in a little bit. Like,
I think this is I think it's a great way of putting it. I do think that the McVay specifically, I do think are doing a very conscious job of trying to keep the scope limited, where it's like we only kind of want to run like 15 to 20 things. And even when it comes to like their off-season self scout studies, all of that, I think they're more worried about how can we best weaponize our own little universe here. I think Ben Johnson's viewpoint about offensive football is a little bit more maximalist. And so I do think that is a key difference between them. And I think that's a very good shout. I think that's talking to guys just in those worlds and like the way that they think about it and even like their processes. I do think that is a key difference between those two groups. And even you said meticulous, like that group is more meticulously groomed than
yeah.
like the Ben Johnson offensive world is. Like there is just like a difference personality wise with those two groups of coaches. And I'm excited to see one of them maybe get a little bit bigger if Declan Doyle does well with this job.
100%. And the last thing I do want to say about the offense, all of what I said about like being curious about what it looks like and not being want to buy in 100%, I'll say this. This is not Lamar Jackson skepticism at all, because Lamar Jackson has always proven that he can change to what the next thing is. Like the
Mhm.
2018-2019 Greg Roman offenses were even different than like what the 2020 and 2021 type of Greg Roman offenses were. Then they get into the Todd Monken era where he's having a lot more on his shoulders in terms of the pre-snap operation. He handled that really well. And so if the offense changes to be Maybe it's a little bit more under center. They're booting more. They're doing more of the you got to turn your back to the defense. He's always proven that the next thing he can handle it. And so I am very excited to see what the ceiling for it looks like.
Overall, I buy into this. I think taking a swing on Hendrickson, I totally get. Some of the depth move pieces that they've done on the defensive line, the body types, the skill sets they've sought out, totally get. I'm excited about the secondary. I think that was already in a good spot. Obviously, hiring Jesse Minter, we haven't really talked about it in those terms. Massive win. Like, it's exactly the coach I think you should come out of this cycle with if you are the Ravens. I'm into all of that. The one thing where I'm kind of like, I wonder if they could have handled this differently, not just not re-signing Tyler Linderbaum. I get that. Like, not wanting to be in on a $27 million a year betting war for a center that's good, but not like a perennial all-pro difference-making player. I completely understand that. I'm just surprised they didn't find any suitable alternative. Like, if you look in the draft, like I always like doing this. Like, all right, well, don't crush a team for not doing something unless you can present an actual, like, legitimate path they could have taken that they didn't. The idea that they drafted both of those big-bodied receivers and then they drafted Jacoby Lane with multiple guys that theoretically could have played center for you. Like, Trey Zune was still on the board. You get a little bit deeper into the fourth round, Connor Liu was still on the board. Like, I know he's coming off of an injury, but the idea that they walked out of the third and fourth rounds of the draft, even if the center run started a little bit earlier than we thought, without like a viable option in that area and picked two receivers in that spot, it's just a little bit surprising. Like, I'm just surprised they weren't a little bit more proactive in trying to find a viable option, even if they were going to let Linderbaum walk out the door.
I agree for two reasons. One, like, there were centers available in this class. That isn't always the case. Like, to be fair, there are not always going to be classes that have a lot of centers, but there were 4 or 5 guys in that, pick 75 to 120 range where a lot of those guys went, and they had picks where they could have done that. The other thing too is, like, this is not a situation where whoever that they were going to insert behind Tyler Linderbaum or whatever had at least played snaps before and had at least done something for them. Their options right now are Corey Bullock, who's been on the team for a couple of years in and out and has really not ever played any meaningful games, and then Javon Gwynn, who Darrell Ledbetter brought over from Atlanta, who he's like kind of familiar with, but again, it's a guy who has never really played and started NFL games. And so it's not like they're replacing him with a guy who has some experience. It's complete unknowns at those spots, which that part of it is a little bit freaky to me.
I guess if you're trying to spin this in a positive way, how much did we know about Jalen Sundell before last season?
Not a lot. And that's a good point. Not a lot. And so if we trust the offensive line coach, which I think both of us kind of do, he had done obviously a really good job in Atlanta, maybe they can get by. And especially too, like, if the guards are who we think they are, can probably get by a little bit with having a center who is not the best player in the world.
Yeah. And again, I do have faith in the people that are going to be in charge of constructing what that offense looks like to potentially get them there. You know what? Out of deference to them, we're going to do the Seahawks last, even though the Rams have better odds. Just out of deference to the Seahawks. They deserve it. They're the Super Bowl champions. The Los Angeles Rams this offseason hired Nathan Sheil, promoted Nathan Sheilhouse to be their offensive coordinator after losing Mike LaFleur. Additions, really just Jalen Watson and Trent McDuffie. Those are the moves. Losses, Kobe Durant was the biggest one in the secondary. Obviously, they account for that with the moves that they made at corner. In the draft, Rams drafted Ty Simpson in the first round. Not sure if you caught that in real time. Max Clare in the second round. Keegan Trost in the third round. Are you buying or selling the 2026 Rams offseason?
Listen, no amount of offseason talk is going to get me there on the Simpson pick, but we don't have to do that. Otherwise,
we can do that a little bit. That's a big part of the offseason.
Listen, we can save that for the end. Because I do think a lot of the other stuff that they did, I think is good and makes them better and like is the right stuff that they needed to do to go to win a Super Bowl. Because I think for one, this is a team that if you are trying to make the push, and again, this is a year-to-year thing with the way that this team is built, going and getting star players, I think, is totally fine. This is a team that has always proven they've had the appetite to do it, and I think that Trent McDuffie can be that. This also, like, if you were to make any case for even going into the playoffs last year, what was going to sink the Rams season? It was their secondary. We all remember the Panthers game where like Bryce Young had just like 300 yards against them and it was ending the game against them with these like big touchdowns. that sort of stuff was always going to be freaky. The fact that they attacked that so aggressively with Trent McDuffie and Jalen Watson, they already have the front that they have. I think the defense is going to kick ass again. And it helps that Shula did not get hired away to go be a head coach somewhere. The fact that they have continuity there, I think is awesome. And so I'm really bought in there. Offensively, it's like, I think some people were doing a little bit of like they need a wide receiver 3, and they probably do need more depth there. I kind of think Jordan Whittington is fine as a wide receiver 3 for an offense that doesn't use a lot of 3 wide receivers anyway. Like I'm not that worried.
They still
about
use it like 50% of the time. It's still half the plays.
Yeah, but they're running a lot out of it. It's a lot of play action. They're always moving that guy. I'm not that worried about.
Also wonder, is it going to be 50% of the plays this year?
Right.
Like now the fact that you got Parkinson, Higbee, Ferguson, Max Clare, and Davis Allen, who played a decent chunk for you last year, like what is them leaning even further into this multi-tight end identity look like? I think you can make an argument they might be overdoing it. Like
they overcooked a little.
The year after drafting Terrence Ferguson in the second round, you're going to draft Max Clare in the second round. And I don't know ton about Max Clare, you know more than me, but reading everything about him and watching a little bit, it does seem like pass catching is like in athleticism is the biggest selling point for Max Clare. Well, you just drafted Terrence Ferguson. Like what is, I'm sure they have a vision for how those players are supposed to coexist and fit together. I don't necessarily know what it is, but they really seem to be leaning into this thing. And I guess that's part of it, is that it's beyond the Ty Simpson in the first round thing. The fact that they drafted a tight end in the second round, I'm kind of like, man, it's just not what I expected the first 2 rounds of the Rams draft to look like. And sometimes you have to divorce yourself from that. Like just because they weren't my expectations doesn't mean it was the wrong way to handle it, but it still is something where I've had to kind of reset a little bit after sitting with it for a little while.
Yeah, at least like, I don't know if I would have done the Claire thing. Like they already have so many tight ends that I almost would have rather tried to just see if I could get some interesting receiver there or something. I will say, to go back to the Ty Simpson thing, I said this in the moment, and like my biggest complaint with it is that, to me, that just felt like the spot where you could have really saved yourself from potential offensive line issues or not having good enough tackle play and all that sort of stuff. And the fact that they didn't want to do that does still irk me. I always get there's going to be the argument you want to play for the future at quarterback. I totally understand that. I just feel like tackle is one of those positions where you can kind of be like, it's fine if we just take a guy here. Like I would have much rather them do that.
I'm okay with it. Like the more and more that I've thought about it, and I think it's one of the reasons that I've kind of come around. I wasn't even that skeptical of it in the moment. I understood it in the moment. I think one of the reasons I've become more and more accepting of it is that as we talk about some of these other teams, and as we talk about what their multi-year outlook at quarterback is, the more times you do that with a team that's just shrouded in uncertainty, it makes it easier to accept the Rams doing this, just because that conversation is so anxiety ridden and anxiety inducing, where you're just like, well, where are they going to get the quarterback? Like, how is it going to happen? Like, can you maneuver around in the first round? Where are you going to get the guy? Pittsburgh, right? So we're talking and sitting here and talking about Pittsburgh, and it's just like, man, you know, I'm so excited about elements of this roster and what the offensive line can look like. And I get the vision for the pass catchers, and like, yeah, there's a lot to really like here, but what's going to happen at quarterback? How are they going to get that guy? If they have the 20th overall pick and there's 4 quarterbacks, are you going to be able to move up? Like that, the Rams are just avoiding that. They're never going to have that set of discussions. And even if you have reservations about Ty Simpson as a player, and this is a team with the window to win right now, I understand if you're in that spot when you're the Rams being like, I'm just bypassing this. I'm just never going to have this conversation. And I believe in our building's ability to lift this guy up. I get landing there. I do.
And I will say that if there's any spot that was going to make Simpson work, or at least get me there eventually, like, it's the Rams. But like, that doesn't have anything to do with Simpson. Like, that could just be insert X quarterback, and I just think that they can get something out of that guy. And he does have he has some of the right traits for that offense.
Yes.
But I think that is a little bit easier to find than like they have let on, where they watched like 70 snaps of him under center and they're like, oh, you can just never find this at the college level. Like that to me, I think is a little bit extreme.
I think
And I think that's also like playing it too safe. Like being too scared to like take some of these other like that's actually the thing is like I think this has been painted as them taking like a risk in
It's the
taking a
opposite of
quarter.
that.
It's the opposite of that. This is like a little bit scared is the wrong word, but they are preventing themselves from certain outcomes in a way that I think it just feels a little bit unnecessary to me.
Push back on that a little bit, in that I actually do think when you watch Ty Simpson and you compare that to pick pick X college quarterback, there are significantly more moments watching Ty Simpson at Alabama last year that look like what he's going to be asked to do in the NFL than an average college quarterback when you're going and watching it. The throws he's being asked to make, the way he's asked to read things out. I think there are two things at play here. I said it in the moment, and I think after digging into it a little bit, I feel even better saying this. I do think that there is an effect of what Brock Purdy has been for the Niners in the Rams being willing to do this with Ty Simpson. And I think it's on two different fronts. One, the appeal of a guy who you see go 1, 2, 3, boom, 1, 2, 3, boom. I can get to the backside of things. My eyes, my mind, the way I'm seeing things is akin to what it will be in the NFL. There's less guesswork there. I think that's appealing. I also think that the playmaking part of it is appealing. And that's the element of it that I think isn't we can just throw whatever guy in there who's been asked to do these things. I think the flashes that you saw from Ty Simpson deeper into the down as a playmaker, some of that off-schedule stuff, he does give you that. Like that is a part of his game in a similar way to what Brock Purdy can do. And so I don't think every quarterback I think it goes beyond solely what he was asked to do. I do think that there are elements of his game that made him more appealing than general college quarterback prospect X might be.
So that's interesting. I think he has some of that. I don't think he had enough of that to like warrant like where he went and to be like that excited about it. Like I would be shocked if that element of his game is ever better than like Baker Mayfield. And like again, Baker Mayfield is a totally fine quarterback.
Baker gives you enough of it, right? I mean, like Baker gives you enough of it for it to be a strength.
For him to, you know what I mean? Like it took Baker a very long time for that part of his game to really be optimized and for what he does in the pocket to be optimized. And so, and I actually think another reason that I think is very analogous to Baker Mayfield as a prospect or as a player overall, early in Baker Mayfield's career, really until he got to Tampa Bay, and I would even say his second year in Tampa Bay, Baker Mayfield was just always pitter-patter in the pocket and just was very uncomfortable.
The drifting, it used to drive me crazy. The drifting would drive me crazy.
The drifting, always only bailing to his right, not wanting to step up in the pocket.
The bailing, yes. It's not the drifting, the bailing to the right. It would drive me nuts.
And it took him 7 years or 6 years, whatever it was, to really break himself of that habit. And maybe Ty Simpson can do it sooner, but I think it took Baker Mayfield a lot of reps to actually get there. And I'm just worried that you can actually always do that with every player.
Here's my counter to that. It might be 7 years before Ty Simpson plays.
You think they're actually going to get robotic arms for really more of a robotic spine for Matthew Stafford to keep him out there?
Last one here. The Seattle Seahawks. Not a ton to report. Brian Fleury in as the offensive coordinator. We haven't talked about that at all. I just think for a lot of different reasons.
I don't even know how to talk about that.
He's a complete unknown, right? Like his background is fascinating. We'll talk about this more as we get a little bit closer. You know, he's somebody that has filled a ton of different roles in the NFL. You know, my first time I became aware of him, he was in Miami and he was working on like the analytics side. And so I think he's a really interesting choice. And I think that he impressed them on a bunch of different levels, but he's somebody that I want to talk more about as we get a little bit deeper into the offseason and like what he might be and the appeal of that, all of it. Additions, Dante Fowler, Rodney Thomas, Noah Igbenogany. That's like it on the veteran market. Not a lot of big time splashy moves in the Seahawks. Lost Boye Mafe, Kenneth Walker, Reek Woolen. In the draft, Jadarian Price in the first round, safety Bud Clark in the second round, cornerback Julian Hill in the third round. Are you buying or selling the Seattle Seahawks offseason?
I had a very weird experience with the Seahawks offseason where it felt like at every turn when we were doing free agency shows, during the draft, during just like the entire process where I just felt like I hated everything that they went about. Things like I said about it in free agency week, the fact that they brought back none of Kenneth Walker, Tariq Woolen, or Boye Mafe, I was like, man, what are we doing? And then they didn't do anything else. I don't know if I love the Jadarian Price pick, But then I just kind of look at the roster holistically. I really like how they approach the defensive back room with just like spamming picks there for the guys that they let walk and trusting your special defensive head coach to really make that work. Like, I ended up in a spot where I was like, listen, most teams are probably going to reset a little bit after the Super Bowl and probably can afford to do that. They have clearly operated that way where they're taking a little bit of a reset and they're just going to try to make sure that they are sustainable for the next 2-3 years. I liked a lot of the moves that they made, and they'll still be a really good roster even if they didn't add a whole lot. And so I think what their goals seemed to be, I actually came around with how they handled things.
When you look at the way that free agency went, there were some backs that were available. One of them was a guy you were letting walk, and then Travis Etienne was really the only other one that was going to give you any sort of pop on the free agent market as like a real guy. Like Keaton Mitchell gives you pop. Keaton Mitchell isn't getting 17 carries a game.
8 carries a
game.
Like that,
that's just not happening. And so I think I have some skepticism about the way they handled the running back and the drafting the running back in the first round, and that being the way that you almost like painting yourself into a corner where you have a lot of urgency and like how you're going to replace that guy and not seeking out alternatives that maybe don't put you in that sort of corner. But I get it. Like I think I've come around on it. I've softened on it in terms of like how they ended up attacking the draft because of where their needs were. And on offense, that was really the big loss. It was Kenneth Walker and them being like, we're going to make sure we go get a viable running back option, especially with Zach Charbonnet hurt early in the year. Even if it's a little rich, I can understand that. Defensively, and just overall, I think they're in a place where they just weren't going to pay more for guys than they were worth. Like, Mafe is going from a rotational player to $20 million a year. We're not going to do that. Reek Woolen going from, for us, a rotational corner to somebody making $15 million a year. We're not going to do that. On offense, there are multiple guys from last year, like Torrey Horton got hurt last year. Elijah Royal was a young player. You could easily see the pass catching room feeling a lot different this year than it was last year, even if they didn't add anybody. And then the last thought I had about this team, they, unlike a lot of the other teams we're talking about on this show and the last show, they have money. They do, over the next couple of years, actually have like a reasonable amount of financial flexibility. There's another team we've talked about, and the one on this show, that kind of leaves some powder dry when it comes to the way that they spend their resources and have a similar mindset where like, we're not going to overpay for these guys. That's the Chargers. The difference between the Chargers and the Seahawks is at the trade deadline or next spring, if there's like a huge swing to be made, this team will do it.
Yeah. They're willing to do it. They straddle a weird world where they're like kind of Philly and kind of the Chargers at the same time. They live in a weird world.
They're willing to do it. And so them having like a little bit of money to throw around and having flexibility, I think of it a little bit differently with them than I do with another team. Like, I bet they'd trade for Max Crosby if they could. Like,
the Chargers would never think about that.
They would never do that.
Yeah.
And so like, and that's why for me, it's like, even if they weren't hyper aggressive, I think giving yourself the avenue to be hyper aggressive for players who are worth it, rather than doing it in free agency for a pool of players who probably aren't worth it. I understand that. I understand leaving yourself that wiggle room in the way that the Seahawks have.
And like with some of the Woolen one, I understand more now with the way that they, threw 3 different draft picks at it. 2 of them are 7th round picks, but still. So I at least understand that one. I think if there was any free agency thing to be made, like there was part of me that wanted them to maybe throw some resources along the interior. But then I looked at like what you were going to have to pay for guards, how many were available. I'm like, I don't even know what you would have really done. I will say, I probably would have been okay paying Kenneth Walker and then not painting ourselves into a corner with the 1st round pick. I think that would have been a totally acceptable way to do it. But again, I also get why they handled it.
I think I probably agree with that. Like, for a team that does have the money, if they wanted to, they could have afforded Kenneth Walker if they had wanted to. And by doing that and even paying a little bit of a premium for him because he was going to hit free agency, is it worth paying that little bit of a premium to give yourself more optionality as you get toward the draft? I think my answer to that is probably yes.
Right. And like if we're going to paint like the exact outcome, it could have been like you pay Kenneth Walker and then that 1st round pick is I'm not even going to say you trade out of it, because I think they probably thought about doing that already on draft night.
They tried to,
five different teams ahead of them already traded out of that pick. But let's just say 32 is instead they draft Chase Besantis ahead of the Cardinals, like 3 or 4 picks ahead of that. Would I rather have Kenneth Walker and Chase Besantis than whatever they ended up doing and then having to spend the first round pick on Jadarian Price? Probably, but I also there's probably still going to be a good team anyway. And so even if it's not optimal, I kind of understand why they operated the way that they did.
All right. Well, that's it. That is all 32 teams. We have bought or sold the entire league here over the last month. Really enjoyed doing these shows. Hope you guys have enjoyed them as well. I assume we'll be doing them as long as I have this podcast, because I think it's a really, really good exercise to go through every single one of these off seasons each spring. While you guys are listening to this, I am on vacation, but obviously we still have multiple shows coming your way. 3 this week. We'll have 3 next week. The next thing that will be in your feed is another edition of the offseason mailbag coming your way on Monday. So be on the lookout for that. For now, that's all we got. Appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you very soon. Thanks for watching. Follow the Athletic Football Show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube.